US consumers remain in fear over the future of the American economy, and as a result, consumer confidence has plummeted. I'm now joined by Wells Fargo economist Tim Quinlan in North Carolina. Tim, what did you make of this disappointing figure?
Well, yeah, that's right. It was certainly a very weak number here, and at 54.9, that's the lowest reading we've seen since the very early 1980s. That said, as far as what this suggests about actual consumer spending, may be not the best, most reliable indicator of what consumer spending trends ultimately are. A lot of times, consumers may say that they're despondent and then actually go out and spend anyway. If you look at the reading that we had here for August, that comes on the back of what was already a rather weak number for June, and yet we just learned for July, and yet we just learned that July retail sales numbers were actually fairly decent. The other thing to sort of keep in mind here is that this also reflects to a large extent some of the frustrations with our United States Congress here. If you look at the approval rating for Congress at 14%, that's the lowest level on record. So, I think that when you sort of consider overall consumer confidence in the context of how we're feeling about Congress these days, it might explain a little bit of the weakness that we're seeing here in the confidence numbers.
Low interest rates are typically a great way to get people borrowing again, but the Fed's decision to keep credit cheap for at least 2 years doesn't seem to be working, does it?
It doesn't seem to be getting people spending, and it doesn't seem to be. I think that the FOMC acknowledged that in the last go round. They sort of, the expression here in the United States is that the gun is out of bullets, and so in the immediate wake of the recession, they were able to engage in this direct purchasing of bonds in the open markets, what we call quantitative easing here, and then there was the second round of that began last fall and went through June of this year, where these quantitative easing measures go out to basically drive down borrowing costs even further out on the longer dated end of the yield curve here. And what they're essentially doing now is that if there's been a shift in terms of policy making, it's that they have said we're instead of just keeping rates extremely low for an extended period, they've now given a specific deadline to it to extend it out through 2013. So if that signals anything to me, it's that they're saying look, we're doing our part here in terms of monetary policy. We're going to keep rates extremely low, and we're telling the public that we're going to keep it there until 2013. So beyond that, it's going to take some extra measure, like some sort of fiscal policy that is beyond the scope of what they're in charge of.
Do you think, while still having to deal with the effects of the 2008 recession, lenders are going to be interested in extending a lot of debt in this environment?
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So one way that you can look at these measures of debt, and we get this through the flow of funds data in the United States, is by looking at consumer and mortgage debt summed up as a percent of disposable personal income. And I'll tell you that from roughly the 1960s through the mid-1980s or so, for the most part, we sort of kept that ratio, south of about 65% or so. In the 1990s and 2000s, we obviously got a lot more comfortable with that. From 1990 until 2000, we go from about 70% to about 85%. And then by the height of the bubble, you mentioned through 2008, right at the outset of the recession, we were at about 125% in terms of total debt to personal income. We've made some fairly substantial improvements over the last few years. We've taken that ratio down now to about 106%. And while that's certainly lower than it was at 125, it's sort of still a pretty highly geared and highly levered consumer. So to answer your question directly, correctly, what does keeping policy rates low do to help people in that scenario? I'd say, to the extent that it encourages them to take on more debt, it's not helping them at all, is it? But to the extent that it lowers the cost of the debt service ratio and keeps the cost of that debt lower, it allows people to maybe make some headway in paying it off, or continue to make headway in paying it off.
Thank you, Tim. We'll be following the US as well as all the other economies around the globe here on Dukas Copy TV all week, so stay tuned.